Nintendo has made a lot of amazing games over the years, with some being able to be cherished to this day. And for some games, and for some companies, they wanted to add a little add on or controller that could get you really into the gaming experience. Some of these being a masterpiece, and others being, let's just say, kind of weird. Today, on this episode of Nelson Gaming, we'll talk about some of these good and somewhat weird add-ons that were added to NES, Game Boy, and any other Nintendo console. Let's get into it. First, let's start talking about some more weirder add-ons. Like, does anyone remember the Handy Boy for the Game Boy? Even though I don't own one, this product made your Game Boy from clunky to looking like a car engine. And honestly, it looks like they intended it to. This thing had louder speakers, an advanced screen, and even a light, which was kind of revolutionary since the Game Boy back then had to require light if you wanted to play any games. And playing your Game Boy next to a lamp all day can probably get, I can imagine, a very, well, not pleasant. To get you an idea of what people had to hold in their hands. Like, the Game Boy was already big enough. It was so big, as a matter of fact, it's earned the title as the Brick, or more of a nickname. But this add-on just made the Game Boy, like I said, look like a car engine. I mean, they really thought the Handy Boy would make you look cool. I mean, just look at the commercial for this thing.
Stereo sound, enhanced joystick, 2x magnification, night lights,
Here it comes.
enlarged fire buttons,
So let's see it.
Handy Boy, the accessory for Game Boy.
Wow, Steve, that's a nice car engine you got there. Another weird accessory for the Game Boy was the Game Boy printer. Now, honestly, it speaks for itself. Someone just thought, hey, you see a printer? You see one of these? And they said, hey, that would look great on the back of a Game Boy. And even if you just got the printer as a standalone, it didn't work the best, because if you wanted the true experience with the printer, you had to get an extra add-on called the Game Boy Camera, where you can add an additional music and games to your Game Boy printer. But the weirdest thing about this is the commercial, because in the commercial, they pretend like they're storing documents for these. I'll let you see it for yourself.
I have hard copies of everything, in case I get abducted.
Dinner's ready. Hello, love.
Now, after we've seen the weird add-ons, let's move on to the more better add-ons, specifically for the NES. And what better way to start off with than the NES Advantage? Not to be confused with the NES Max, which is actually way more disappointing than this, but we'll get back to that later. The NES Advantage was actually a pretty awesome device. Instead of a D-pad, which was most common for the NES, you had a joystick. And you also had the A and B buttons way bigger. And the only problem I can see with this is that it took up both ports for the controller. So, like, how you would play is that you would have to, there would be like a little switch right here, and when you're player 1, you switch it to player 1, and when you're player 2, you switch it to player 2, like that. The only problem I can see with this is, what if player 2 doesn't want to play on this thing? What are you gonna do? Because the NES can only port 2 controllers, and since those 2 controllers are taken up by this, what if player 2 doesn't want to play with this? Honestly, I don't see why, but what if? It also had this amazing feature, which I'm really fond of. It's called the slow effect, where if you press it, it should be called the cheat button, because really, it helped you cheat in any game. This button was amazing. I tried it out with Donkey Kong Classics, and it worked a dream. Like, what? You may be wondering, what did the slow button do? Why are you wondering that question? Because it literally says slow on it. But I'll explain it to you anyway. When you press the slow button, it pauses the game back and forth. This causes the frame rate to slow down, therefore giving you an advantage, therefore more time to play the game. Say you're in a final boss, for example, you can just hit the slow button and then sit back as you slowly defeat your boss. It was honestly pretty cool. Similar to the NES Advantage, we have the Quick Shot. This Quick Shot worked with most flying games. You know, games where you're in the air, like Afterburner. How this would work is that most flying games would have it where when you press the A or B button, it would like fire a missile or move you forward. So this designed it where the A button is the moving forward button, and this is the button to shoot things. And when you move the joystick around, it's like moving a D-pad. I haven't really tested this one out yet, and since it's so old, it may not work, but hey, I haven't tested it out yet, so we don't know for sure. It also had these weird little sticky things. I'm pretty sure you're supposed to like stick them to a table. However, they've been worn out over the years and don't really stick as well. If anything, nowadays, it just makes it harder to play your game. Like, it was intended to just, and now it's like, I hope that was the best example I could give. And finally, we have the NES Max. Hold on. This was actually the first add-on for the NES that I got. And I didn't put it in the weird section since it's not very weird. Like, all it did was just turn the D-pad into a little slidey thing, and that's about it. The NES Max is basically the smallest version of the NES Advantage, just without the slow button or the two-player mechanic, which is probably the reason why it keeps being mistaken or accidentally called by the NES Advantage, and is also probably reason why the NES Advantage is accidentally sometimes called as the NES Max, which is actually pretty confusing sometimes when you try to just talk about this controller in a common conversation. I totally did not base that sentence off real events. I was actually pretty disappointed in the NES Max because you see this little thing right here? Yeah, it doesn't work. They added a piece of plastic yet again that does not work. Really, the only thing different between the NES Max and a regular NES controller, which you can see right here, is that it doesn't have the weird little thing, this little red thing, and that there's no turbo buttons. That's it. So pretty much buying this is like buying a cheaper version of this without all the awesome mechanics. I still kind of like it though. It works very well for hockey games, but there's not a lot of hockey games for the NES. Like what? There's only like 3 hockey games, like one of which is actually good for this. Okay, so maybe the NES Max was a waste of time, but it was a good waste of time. And with that, that concludes our video. I'll probably make a part 2 on this if I find any more weird Nintendo add-ons. I don't think I forgot any. Please don't let that be foreshadowing. Anyway, this has been Nelson's Game Review. See you in the next episode.